Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com, and this is a preview of the Panasonic S1R and S1 cameras that Panasonic has officially announced. Finally, we knew that they announced it, but now we have more specs. Now we're basing all of the specs off of the press release that Panasonic shared with us, and at this point we haven't had a chance to talk to them on the phone to get some of our questions answered, and we hope to get a hands-on one day so that we can do a real-world review, but right now there is a global launch event going on in Spain that we weren't invited to. One day they'll invite us. That day is still not today. So before I jump into that, being that we're talking about gear, if you haven't downloaded My Gear Vault, could you go do that? It's free for iOS and Android. Go to mygearvault.com to learn all about it. It's the best way to input, organize, and protect your gear. And like I said, it is free. So I'm going to go over the specs for both of these cameras. Now keep in mind, they're very similar from camera to camera. So where they differ, I will let you know where they differ. Let's start with the megapixels. The S1R is 47.3 megapixels and has no OLPF. The S1 has 24.2 megapixels with an OLPF. Now, does this sound familiar to you? Does it sound like another system or other systems out there like the Z6, Z7, A7 III, A7R III, and the... Steven, there's no Canon, right? That's right, there's no Canon to compare it to because... Now let's talk about the mount, because what lenses can you mount on this camera, being that this is Panasonic's first full-frame camera? Well, they are part of the L-Mount Alliance. That's right, that's Sigma, Panasonic, and Leica. There may be a few other people that are a part of the L-Mount Alliance, but they're a part of it, and there's 3 lenses launching with this camera. You have a 50-1.4, a 70-200 f4, which is questionable in my mind, and a 24-105 f4. Now the first 2 that I mentioned, even though I'm holding up 3 fingers, that's really 2. Those are professional lenses considered, and the 24-105 is, of course, more like it's not going to be a bad lens. It's going to be a pretty good lens for running and gunning because it's a 24-105. Now keep in mind, by 2020, they expect to have 10 new lenses out, and on top of that, Sigma is going to go to town because they're part of the, everybody, L-Mount Alliance, which means that they're going to have a lot of their lenses to go on to this system. Now let's talk about ISO. The S1R is 100 to 25,600, and the S1 is 100 to 51,200, and the Z6 and the Z7, oh, that's right. I mean, it probably has the same sensor in there because Sony probably makes this sensor, just with some tweaks that the Panasonic nerds and propeller heads wanted to put into it. They would send it to Sony, and then Sony goes ahead and makes the sensor. That's just a guesstimate on my part. That wasn't actually in the specs, but there is a new Venus processor. Cool. Okay, moving on to frame rate. You've got 9 frames a second with AFS. You've got 6 frames a second with AFC, and you get 5 frames a second with AFC when you shoot electronic. So that would be your silent mode for shooting. So it dumbs it down just like all of the other cameras out there on the market that are in the mirrorless world. You also have face detect plus IAF, which is supposed to focus in on the pupil, not so much the eyelids. So if you're the guy with the eye who has a weird looking pupil, Steven, pop up a picture with permission from Eric Rossi. That's the guy with the eye. It may have trouble with his pupil because he has some eye condition, which he could explain to you. So what type of focus system will you find in these cameras? It's advanced. That's what Panasonic calls it, Advanced Contrast Detection AF. Now the only way to see how good this is to take it out into the real world. Now, we will do that when we actually get our hands on it because I'm interested to see how that works. Now, you will find 225 focus points. Now, we think that's in both cameras because it didn't specify that one camera had more than the other. It said 225 focusing points. Now, how many shots in a row can you get? You can get 40 raw in the S1R. You can get 90 in the S1. On top of that, it has advanced AI tech. Again, Panasonic with the advanced stuff. Guess what this does? It helps you track things like cats, dogs, birds, and humans. So this is going to be really good at border control. So what memory card will you find in this camera? I lied. It's not memory card. It's cards. Take that, Nikon. You've got one card, and the Panasonic has two. UHS 2 SD card plus an XQD card. Finally, somebody other than Nikon using this, because in the future, it's going to be reverse compatible with CF Express, probably with a firmware update. So being that this has two card slots, that must mean the camera is bigger, right? Well, the answer is yes. It's wider and thicker, aka chodier, than the Nikon D850. It's very similar to the D850. In fact, it weighs 899 grams, which is almost 2 pounds, whereas the D850 weighs just about the same thing. They're very similar in weight and also in size, which is interesting because this is a DSLR and that one's not. And that begs the question is, why is it so much bigger? Is it because people don't care about larger cameras? No, when we get to the video specs, it's probably because of the cool video specs that it needs to be bigger to dissipate a lot of the heat and to squeeze in that Venus processor, which probably takes up a lot of extra space. Being that this is a larger camera, that means that you can squeeze in a larger battery. And with that being said, the battery is 3,050 milliamps, and it's a huge battery that looks like it fills up the entire grip. Now, they say you're going to get about 400 shots out of it, but we've seen from all of those SEPA ratings in the past that we get a hell of a lot more than that, and those ratings are probably well off. If you're on the go and you need to get some extra juice into the camera, well, you can do USB charging while the camera is on, which is a nice option if you're out there in the wilderness and you're like, my batteries, I want to get some extra juice from my USB thingy. So there you go. But the question is, can you power your phone going the other way? I don't think so. Now, what's cool is this EVF. This EVF that they're calling a live viewfinder has 5.76 million dots. Now, they're saying live because they're basically saying that's what the eye sees. Now, in my case, my eyes don't seize very good. They actually seize because they shake back and forth like that. So I wonder if this viewfinder has stabilization for my eyes, which are shaking. But anyway, 5.76 million dots is a massive EVF that is a lot more than what's out there on the market, but something tells me it's probably made by Sony, and we'll start to see it in future Sony cameras as well as Nikon's in the future when they do that. You'll also be able to switch magnifications, which I'm not really sure where that comes in handy. I'm going to have to see that in the real world. Now, there is a tri-axis tilting touchscreen that is 2.1 million dots. Now, unlike the GH5, it doesn't do this. It doesn't flip out and let you rotate it. I do flip out and rotate sometimes. I get upset, but it's very similar to the Fuji because it does let you shoot vertically and pop the screen out just a little bit. Now, you'll get 5.5 stops of IBIS, and you can get up to 6 stops when you pair it with dual IS, so a lens that they have from the L-mount Alliance that also has the OS built in to the lens. It's going to work in conjunction with the body. Now, here's an interesting feature that Panasonic's known for. You can do 6K and 4K photo modes where you can get JPEGs. In the 4K mode, you can shoot up to 60 frames a second, but keep in mind, it's just going to give you JPEGs. That's pretty cool to be able to pull those stills out at pretty good resolution from the different cameras. Now, here's something interesting if you're somebody who's into flash sync speed. You will do 1/320th flash sync speed, and not just 1/200th or 1/250th of a second. So if you're a shooter like that, well, you'll be happy with 1/320th of a second. Now, high-res mode is pretty cool. In the S1R, you can get a 187 megapixel image by the time it's done taking those 8 frames and stitching them together. In the S1, you're getting 96 megapixels. So this is going to come in handy for those people that like to shoot landscapes, kind of where the subject isn't really moving, because if something's moving fast across the screen, it's not going to work out. But to be able to get that mega shooting mode, very similar to what Sony offers you, and I guess what Olympus offers you in the other cameras, it's a pretty cool feature. There's also a couple of things I need to mention about the body that I didn't mention yet. There's a joystick. You have the ability to get a vertical grip, Nikon. Get a grip, Nikon. Make a vertical grip. That should be a slogan for a shirt. It also has a joystick in the grip. You have back illuminated buttons, something like the D850 and the D5 have, and even the D500. The Z6 and Z7, they don't have back illuminated buttons. So basically, it seems like Panasonic went ahead and made what Nikon maybe could have made. I didn't say should, but maybe could have made, because the cameras actually look very similar between the Z6, Z7, and these two cameras. It's like they saw that and they're like, oh, let's just blow it up a couple percentage points, because then it's going to be very similar. You do have a full HDMI port built into this camera, which is a nice option, and there's a switch for AFC and AFS, which is kind of interesting where they put it, because it's pretty quick to make that change. But wouldn't it have been better to just do what Canon actually does something right? Press one button, go to AFC, press one button, go back to AFS. I don't know, that's what they did. Hey, guess what? This paper's done, and we're now on to video specs. Before we move into the video specs, I do want to remind you that we do have 14 custom Lightroom presets. If you haven't checked them out yet, go over to FroKnowsPhoto.com/presets, because they are on sale, and they're gonna work really well with this camera. For the stills, I can guarantee that, almost guarantee that and stuff. But this is what people have been waiting for. People have been waiting for the video specs of these cameras. We've got 4K at 60 frames a second. Now it's gonna give you 420 8-bit internally, but there is a firmware coming in 2019, which is gonna give you 422 10-bit at 30 frames a second internal, and 4K at 422 10-bit at 60 frames a second external, but only for the S1, not for the S1R. Again, this is a good place to remind you that the S1R is more geared towards stills, and the S1 is kind of the hybrid version. It's gonna be good for stills, it's gonna be good for video, it's gonna give you a lot of great options. For example, the S1 can do 4K 30 frames a second with full pixel readout. And to add to that, the S1 will do HEVC, which is 4K 10-bit 420 internal. Now, both of these cameras are gonna give you unlimited recording time. That's me golf clapping, except for when you shoot 60 frames a second in 4K. Now let's talk about slow motion, because you could do 1080p at 180 frames a second, and the question is, will that be cropped? We'll have to see when we get our hands on the camera. And finally, let's talk about price and availability. The S1R is going to be $3,699 for the body, which is more expensive than what the other camera manufacturers have for the similar type version. Now, the S1 is $24.99 for the body only. Now, pre-orders start on February 1st. You can check out adorama.com/fro if you want to go ahead and pre-order. You can do it from there. That helps us out. That's our affiliate link. And they'll be available in April. So that's a little expensive, but there's a lot of unbelievable features when it comes to video in this camera. And I'm gonna be curious to see how this works in my hands when I'm shooting stills. So our hope is to get a real working model with full firmware ready to go out into the real world to make a real world review of. Do you have any questions that you would like us to reach out to Panasonic for? Let us know down below in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And that's where we're going to leave it. Thank you very much for watching. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com. See ya.